Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. On this show, I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Before we get on the show, a little short sponsor message. Today's episode, sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we help the wine and craft industry scale their business through authentic content. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Bianca Harmon is joining us today. She's our digital audio channel director. How's it going, Bianca?
It's going great, Joe. Super stoked to talk with our guests today.
Yes, today we have Ryan Christiansen. Ryan is the president and head distiller at Caledonia Spirits, makers of Barr Hill. Barr Hill's a Vermont, or Caledonia Spirits is a Vermont distillery that makes spirits from honey. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks, Drew. Great to be here.
Oh, I'm excited to talk to you about this. The spirits from honey. Before we talk about that, let's talk about you and how you got into the spirits industry.
Yeah, you bet. So I came into beverage by way of really just fascination for fermentation, which started with beer for me. I was pretty interested in making beer at home as a home brewer. That slowly evolved into making kombucha and kimchi and all sorts of various fermentation explorations in food and beverage. And then eventually realizing that I couldn't find a lot of supplies to support that hobby. And so I opened up a small home brewing store. And my goal at that time was to open a brewery, go from the home brewing store, develop my own recipes, and then scale up into a community pub like model. But that plan, while in process, I met a beekeeper named Todd Hardie, who was completely passionate about the well-being of the hives and bees and the importance of bees within agricultural systems and how we feed people. And Todd's just a lifelong farmer. He grew up keeping bees as a child, and that evolved into, he at one time opened a commercial winery and making mead. And so anyway, when I met Todd, he still had the meadery and he wanted to build distillery. And I saw this opportunity to get into distilling. And I tend to be kind of a lifelong learner, and I was really excited about beer and everything I was learning. But suddenly there was this whole new set of variables, like working with a still, same fermentation principles, but now I'm playing with a still and cooking spirits. And that seemed like an incredible learning opportunity and a challenge. But the really exciting part was Todd's connection to the bees and how do we bring that agricultural product of raw honey, into the distillery, and more importantly, into cocktail culture. So that's the journey I've been on, and that's led to about a little over a decade now working with the bees and distilling.
That's fantastic. Talking about the bees, we've seen the documentaries of, how is the bee population in Vermont? Is it suffering the same sort of difficulties that we hear on the West Coast here with bees population dying?
Yes, absolutely. Bees, I don't think there's a healthy place on planet Earth for bees right now, and that is a problem for all of us. I tend to think bees are kind of the canary in the coal mine. And, we need to support bees. They're really these invisible creatures. And we think of bees and we think of wasps and hornets and bee stings and all these, terrible associations. But the reality is honeybees and pollinators, for the most part, are just fuzzy little creatures that want to support, or their actions support, our agricultural systems, which is how we feed people. So when you think about California, one of the major issues California is facing is there's so much cropland, so few pollinators, so little water, and that dynamic is really tough. So we're seeing a lot of things with bees traveling around the country to make sure we have pollinators, rather than supporting how do we bring back the actual native pollinators so that we don't need to commercialize this. So, I think, generally speaking, here in Vermont, we have a lot of really small beekeepers. We source honey from a 250-mile radius, so we extend beyond Vermont. We pull in a lot of honey from New York, which is a really rich agricultural region. And we also work with Vermont beekeepers, and there's a couple of beekeepers. We're very close to the Canadian border, so we actually cross that Canadian border and pull in some Canadian honey as well. All of it is just really interesting honey. Honey is a wildly rich source of botanicals, and it's also a source of sugar. So both of those things work really well in the distilling environment.
Absolutely. Jumping right into the technical aspect of distilling towards the gin and towards the vodka, do you start with a mead, or is it the initial fermentation different than starting?
Our vodka is starting from a mead, 100% pure raw honey. We source honey. We bring it in 650-pound drums. We never heat it. We bring it into the distillery. It's thick, it's viscous, it's flavorful. There's a big difference between the honey you're going to find at the supermarket versus, honey fresh out of the hives. Unfortunately, a lot of what you find at the supermarket has been pasteurized and heated and filtered, and it's gone through all these processes that have taken so much flavor and botanical depth out of the honey. So we often think of it as sugar. When we're making our vodka, we're taking pure raw honey, putting it straight into the drum. So that means beeswax, pollen, propolis. I mean, just all this really terroir. The bees are out there collecting nectar, essentially scraping the earth of its botanicals. Our job as distillers is to make sure that we keep that intact as we take it through fermentation. So once we ferment that to dry, we effectively make a dry mead. Then we send it over to our column still, where we're doing 2 distillations and only 2 distillations. You don't want to distill it any more than that. We lose that sort of subtle characteristic.
Yeah,
and vodka
is still out the personality.
Exactly. I mean, it's a tricky balance. Vodka, by definition, is flavorless, odorless, neutral. So we're trying to hold on to just the subtle characteristic that reminds you of where this came from, while also making sure our vodka is fitting in the vodka aisle.
How would you say that you differentiate yourself from other distilleries and honey producers using bees and honey to distill their spirits? Versus, how would you differentiate yourself?
I don't taste a lot of honey spirits from other folks, so there could be some really great ones out there. I don't know. There's not a lot of folks doing this. I think what's really different about us is, and a lot of this came from Todd and what Todd taught me and other beekeepers have taught me, it's how flavorful honey can be. It's also incredibly difficult sugar to work with, from a predictability on fermentation. Nutritional values are all over the map. Filtration issues are, prevalent, we'll say. You just never really know, like the wax content in one honey is going to be totally different than another. And that's going to work very differently when it's going through your system. There's all sorts of challenges, but that's the nature of working with real raw materials. I mean, if anybody comes to the distillery, and I encourage anybody to come in, we love guests, but we like to open up these drums of honey, and 650 pound drums of honey, or hand you a 40-pound block of beeswax and see, this is really raw material. This is flavorful. This is from the farm. And that's how it comes to us. And so that creates some real challenges. It'd be a lot easier if we just brought in filtered honey and ran it through the process. It'd be really predictable. But yeah, we're up to the challenge.
Absolutely. Now we have some samples here today. So I'd like to actually kind of experience what you're talking about. The first one we've got here is the Barr Hill vodka. And this is what we're talking about here right now. So it's 100% from honey, twice distilled. Is there anything else? I got it even hand signed or hand numbered.
Yeah. And this vodka, you're not going to find, well, I haven't found yet in any other vodka, anything with the botanical depth. We talked about that, but also the creamy viscosity. Honey is really special. We've got a column still. You could probably almost see it right behind me, behind my head. But we've produced vodka from all sorts of carbohydrates, everything from rye grain to maple syrup, and all produce really nice vodkas. But it's only honey that brings this body and this mouthfeel and this creamy texture
it's like
into vodka.
Quality to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully on the nose, you're getting just subtle. Again, it should taste like a vodka, but there should be just the kind of floral. And what you're getting there, the honey, right? When you open up the 650 pound drum of honey to it, and then you taste it and you get such an overwhelming amount of sweetness, you lose a lot of that botanical, that sugar out, and then you distill it into vodka. You've removed so much beautiful character that shouldn't taste, but more in aromatics.
Absolutely. And the finish is dry. I mean, it's a dry finish. It's got a glycerol feel to it, but it's got a very just great nose to it. I mean, it definitely still
so amazing.
Tastes like a vodka. It's in that vodka category, but there's something special there for sure.
There's no added honey distillation. That's commonly people from honey. It must be honey sweetened. There's actually very little actual sugar, no sugar, even though you taste just a subtle something with that body.
And is that all through the fermentation process? It's cutting out all of the sugars, or
the process converts into alcohol. There's still some residual sugar, but that's not going to travel through the column distillation.
Tasting through these vodkas, so glycerol, so good. And then the fact that you're using this raw, unfiltered honey in big 500, 600 gallon containers, What's the production look like on this? How much do you produce every year of this vodka?
We don't make a lot of vodka. We make probably about 4,000 cases total. That's the full production throughout the whole year. So yeah, it's a pretty small. The price point's fairly expensive. It's over $60 a bottle, which is a pretty serious investment for folks, buying a bottle of vodka. But when you look at the cost of honey,
that's what I was going to ask. How much?
It takes us over 3 pounds of raw honey just to make a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka.
And
wow.
Honey, I mean, just going to the store, I see how much honey costs. And to get the good stuff, it's going to be even more. So it sounds like it's actually a pretty good deal at $60 a bottle.
Yeah, we're probably not making any margin on it, but it works well for us. We have a mission, and our mission is to connect cocktail culture to agriculture and make sure that we're driving conversations that go all the way back to the farm. And the farm includes bees. And what vodka does for us, we're very focused on gin. That's the majority of our business. That's almost everything that we focus on. But what vodka does is it allows us to take, like I mentioned earlier, we're taking a lot of honey from a lot of different beekeepers. There's a fair amount of variation. So there's a lot of different barrels of honey coming into this distillery. Part of the way that we sort those and make sure that we're delivering a fairly consistent quality gin to market is by taking all the outlying honey and putting it to our vodka program. Because I believe the vodka aisle needs character, right?
Absolutely.
So if we can bring just a little bit of, like if you've got a late season honey that tastes a little bit different than everything that's been coming out of the hives all summer long, great. That's going to make a really interesting nuance in vodka. And because you distill it to 190 proof, a big amount of flavor differential doesn't lead to a big swing in the vodka flavor. It's just subtle cues. So vodka's become this really nice, sort of catch-all for all of the odd barrels, which produces a small amount of vodka, but uses a lot of honey.
Sure. Oh, that's really interesting. So gin's your wheelhouse. Now,
absolutely.
Let's talk about the gin then for a second here. So we have another gin. We have the juniper raw honey gin, the unaged one. Now, is this your mainstay at the distillery?
Yeah. So Barr Hill gin, that's what we're best known for. That's really the product that's, really, really kind of the driving engine of this facility. It's very juniper forward. We aren't trying to stray from the gin category with a lot of super contemporary, unexpected botanicals. We're staying really focused on juniper. Juniper's got this great drying kind of resinous character.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned before, honey has a big, bold sweetness to it, but it also has tremendous botanical depth. So we use juniper, and our distillation process is extracting the juniper oils, which work really well to dry out that honey a little bit. And they make a great balance. Very similar to what a brewer's doing with hops and malts, right? Really drying out the palate to set you up for a big, bold malt character. We're sort of, honey is our malt and juniper is our hop, so to speak, as we create this big, bold flavor. But by balancing those two, you reveal the complexity within the honey. So hopefully as you're tasting this, you're not just getting juniper and honey. You're probably getting sort of a few wildflowers.
For sure. And still has that same glycerol kind of quality to it. Like mouth coating texture that I don't often get from gin. And you're right. Now the gin landscape is so across the board right now. You really don't know what you're going to get if you just go grab a bottle of gin at the store, especially if it's in that higher tier specialized in. It could smell like cucumbers. Some of the gins you taste, it's almost doesn't even seem like they'd be gin. But
I love this gin.
Really elegant juniper nose to it with some.
Where are you sourcing your juniper?
The juniper's coming out of Eastern Europe. Juniper grows all over here. We haven't figured out a way to economically harvest and bring in local junipers, but that's, we have a small lab here on site, and we're doing explorations all the time. So hopefully at some point we'll begin to introduce local juniper as well. That's undoubtedly a goal. But we've spent most of our time in the lab on this product, really focusing on what's within the honey. That's been the real challenge for us, is when you taste Barr Hill gin and you taste, the honey, there's actual botanical contributions in there. And we want to know better what they are. Joke, or maybe I'm not even joking, but, I've been doing this for a decade now, over a decade. And I feel like we're just starting to learn how to ask the right questions to answer. Like the bees don't tell you much. They've just got these beautiful boxes of honey and bring that into the distillery. And then we go through all sorts of sensory explorations where we go, wow, this one has really something special to it. Well, what is that? You can answer that by looking at where was the hive geographically located. If it's next to an apple orchard, you're probably going to have some pretty obvious cues there. But there's also microscopically, we're working with an outside lab. We don't do this in our lab, but we ship the honey out and they're looking at the shape of the pollens that they're finding and trying to help us sort of understand, hey, we found aster pollens. That's going to give us a good sense of what you might be tasting. But none of that's really revealing anything if you don't tie that to sensory, right?
Yeah.
So we've got these three components: geography, microscopic research, it's called pollinalysis, and then sensory. And we're always leaning on all three of those tools to help us understand our own product. But I think right now as a company, we're right on the verge of really, I don't know, the next decade or two, we might actually figure this out.
Really? Right. Now, what's the flavor profile that you're looking for in your honeys, or what's the correct honey that makes it to the gin versus the vodka?
It's many things. Color is a big component too. If you look at the color of our gin, it probably doesn't come through the Zoom screen, but there's kind of this just subtle straw yellow.
Yeah,
hue.
yellow tint. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's a big part of it. So color is a big characteristic that we're monitoring for. Sugar content, general flavor. But as all these drums come in, they're all numbered numerically, so we know at what time they came out of the honey production. And usually you find similarities. You go through the earlier honeys in the year, stand out. Usually it's more kind of simpler flavors early in the year, a lot of clover, things like that. And then you get into the late season, you start getting into like goldenrod and a lot of these sort of bigger, earthier things that start to take you down these like deeper flavors that would just be sort of overbearing in the gin. But it's that really rich summer season, botanical, wide array of wildflowers that we're after. So that's kind of center point that we're trying to manage to. And those outer edges, they all go down the path of vodka.
Kind of the June, July sweet spot.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
No, it's interesting to think of honey almost like grape varieties. If you took honey from the different regions and growing next to different vineyards, not vineyards, but different orchards, different types of floral concepts, and you got it to the mead state, would you see that sort of almost varietal characteristic between the different meads?
If you can control the inputs, yes. It's particularly hard when we here in Vermont, we don't have a lot of beekeepers we work with from Vermont, mostly because they're all such small beekeepers. They don't have a lot of honey. So we do have a few that we work with. And there's a lot of like special projects work that we do. We did a gin called the Montpelier gin, and we opened up this distillery, the grand opening. We already had a distillery up in Hardwick. When we opened up our bigger distillery, we partnered with, I think, 6 or 7 different beekeepers from all the surrounding towns around the area. And we blended all those honeys together. And we did that intentionally because we wanted to really kind of, get a variety of the land around us, but also because none of those beekeepers could supply enough honey to produce the single batch, which speaks to how small, and these are backyard hobbyist beekeepers. But just in that project, the honey that came right up the street in Northfield to the honey down the same street and the other way in Worcester, wildly different honeys. There's a Japanese knotweed honey beekeeper who keeps his bees next to Japanese knotweed, which is known as an invasive species and kind of a wrestling match for us here. But it produces incredible honey. So we brought the knotweed honey into the mix, and we created this really totally unique spirit by embracing 6 or 7 different apiaries, all in a pretty small, maybe a 15-mile radius.
What is the average amount of honey? These are all small farms that you're getting these from. What is on average, how many gallons of honey are you getting from these beekeepers?
Well, those are all the special projects beekeepers I just mentioned. So those are super small, 30, 40 pounds at a time, tiny releases. Our mainstay is, we have 3, now 4 more commercial apiaries we're working with, which are producing much larger volume. And a lot of those folks are keeping bees in, like I said, upstate New York, near a lot of the agricultural regions where they need pollination.
Talking about the cocktail culture meeting the agriculture, what is your recommended serving cocktail for this that preserves all these like nuances we're tasting right now?
So Barr Hill gin, there's a classic cocktail called the bee's knees. which is known for the best. It's gin, honey, lemon. So naturally, Barr Hill is a pretty good fit for that cocktail. That over the years has become a cocktail that a lot of our customers, they buy Barr Hill to go make a bee's knees. More recently, we realized, one, what a great cocktail that is, and the whole world should know about it. And it's very simple to make as well. But two, not a lot of people understand how important spreading the awareness of the threats of the pollinators really is. And so we saw that as an opportunity for something that our brand can do. Obviously, we're on a mission to support bees and support pollinators. But if we can tie that conversation specifically to one cocktail, I think it's going to spread a lot faster. So we started an effort called Bees Knees Week in 2017.
I was just getting ready to ask you about that. That's so funny.
Yeah. So that was actually a project that it was born in just a neighborhood conversation in Asbury Park. You're at a cocktail bar, and a bartender who happened to be a beekeeper as well, in a fairly pointed way, said, "What are you guys doing for the bees?" I answered and didn't really think about it. I said, "Well, we pay really good prices to our farmers. We've got great partnerships. We're taking really good care of them." And he said, "You're just talking about beekeepers. You're not talking about bees." And it was such a, put me on my heels and really had me and everybody in the room self-reflective of what are we doing for the actual bees other than just being good stewards of the bees. What is our brand doing for the bees? So it became this opportunity to start this. We brainstormed on it. We came up with Bees Knees Week. And then we said, hey, this is much bigger than one neighborhood. This is an idea that could catch on anywhere. So anyway, it's grown every year. And now we partner with bartenders and restaurant owners and retail store owners. And Bees Knees Week is the last week in September. And all you have to do to participate is make a Bees Knees cocktail or order one at a restaurant and take a photo, put it on social media, use the hashtag Bees Knees Week, and we plant 10 square feet of pollinator habitat for every photo shared.
Oh,
and this started as kind of a neighborhood, hey, what if we did this kind of idea? And it's now grown to, I think we have 3,000 participating accounts. Last year, we had 3,000 participating accounts all around the nation. And so it's really just been a huge activation for our brand. But more importantly, it's just had a huge impact. I think last year alone, we planted over 250,000 square feet of pollinator habitat.
Holy moly.
And where are you planting this?
So we partner with this great group here in Vermont, a guy named Mike Tiernan. It's called Be the Change. And Mike is focused on putting pollinator habitat in highly visible places. His company's goal is to get pollinator habitat in every town in Vermont. But we see this growing way outside of here. Rooftops in New York need some pollinator habitat. Houston, Texas needs pollinator habitat. California needs it.
And what
see
what
this
does
as
that
something that's
pollinator
going to.
habitat look like?
Well, and Mike's got a very methodical approach to this. He's done this for a very long time. So he's the expert and I'm definitely the student. Our whole team, when Mike speaks, we all just kind of gather around and listen. He's like the wise man of the pollinators. But he's got this, I think it's a 5-year plan going through the right seedings, the right way that you handle it. He and I did a tour of pollinator habitat he's planted in Moortown, Vermont last fall. And that one's on year 3. And it's just beautiful. It doesn't happen in 1 year. You've got to sort of get started in year 1, plant something else in year 2, let these things reseed. And slowly, if you go tour any of his established, he's got one in Richmond, which is just so beautiful. He does a lot of these plantings under panels.
It's more than just planting flowers. I mean, give the listeners an idea of the plant structure and why it's a multi-year thing.
Yeah, it's about building an ecosystem. It's really, if you walk into Mike's fields, he measures, and I forget exactly how he conducts this measurement, but he can tell you how many pollinators per minute you're seeing. And there's nothing like it standing in these fields. It's traffic. There's just so many different species and they're just buzzing around. It's bees and butterflies and moths. And Mike will stand there and he'll point them out and he'll say, oh, look at that one over there. Look at that hummingbird. And he'll tell you about the connection between a hummingbird and jewelweed and how it's evolved over just such an incredible amount of time. But we all take it for granted. We drive by a field that's been mowed just for the sake of mowing it, or like the monarch butterflies are now on the endangered species. We're sort of just ignoring human impact on the environment around us because it looks green. That's probably good enough. But the reality is that we're doing harm.
So could it be something similar to for example, here in the Bay Area, we have the California Academy of Science. and the whole roof is like a living roof, right? And so it's a 2.5 acre roof that's home to wildlife. It's got greenery. It's got all flowers. I mean, kind of something like along those lines, but for pollinators or?
Absolutely. I mean, Mike does a program. This is his core business. Anybody can offset their own home. You can say, I mean, this distillery, we had to offset this distillery. To build this distillery, we had to take away pollinator habitat, right? Before there was a distillery here, there was an open field. Once we built this distillery, that it might be small in the grand scheme of things, but these things add up. Slowly, one house at a time, we build New York City. And that's a lot of space that is no longer supported with pollinators. So, Bianca, what you mentioned is so important. How do we take these urban environments and make it a place where pollinators can thrive as well? I think that's the kind of coexistence we all need to be thinking about.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And these pollinator habitats, is the honey harvested, or are they just allowed to kind of do their own thing?
No, these are all native pollinators. So there's no commercial production whatsoever. And that's important to us. We depend on commercial pollinators to produce honey. But the reality is that the Barr Hill brand stands for much more than just supporting commercial apiaries. We can support native pollinators. That's even better.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's, so on your website, you have a picture of a cooperage. Do you do your own barrel cooperage at Barr Hill?
We don't. We've done quite a bit of work in that arena over the years, but I'll tell you a quick funny story. I think it's like 2013. No, I think it's 2014. It was right after we came out with our barrel aged gin, which is called Tomcat. We developed Tomcat really by accident. It was, we were scaling up our 15-gallon still. We started with a little 15-gallon still and had to get that into a bigger still because the demand, we were trying to keep up and working around the clock to run enough gin. And so I'm trying to dial in this 300-gallon still, and I'm getting closer and closer and closer to gin that could go out under the Barr Hill label. But we could still, in a blind tasting, we could still detect it. And meanwhile, I had a whiskey still that I had wanted to be running. We wanted to make whiskey as well. But we were a small company. We had really, no resources to speak of and had to get this gin still running and couldn't possibly keep not releasing gin. But we're stubborn. We're not going to put the Barr Hill label on a product that clearly wasn't Barr Hill. Anyway, long story short, I had purchased a bunch of brand new oak barrels, American oak barrels that I had intended to make bourbon. And these barrels were going to shrivel up. They weren't going to hold anything if I didn't put some liquid in there. So I had this pretty darn good gin and these barrels. And I said, hey, let's just put the gin in the barrel and see how it tastes. And that brand new American oak with that juniper characteristic and the raw honey, it just created this beautiful flavor. Anyway, I'm telling quite a few stories here in a quick fashion, but we released that product. It took us 18 months to get the TTB to allow us to release that product. And initially we couldn't even put gin on the label. They said, you can't age a gin. That's not a gin. And we said, well, we did. And it is a gin. It was just a bit of a wrestling match with the federal government.
You can't age a gin, huh?
Yeah, that's the whole thing. But we eventually released it. We thought we had way too much inventory. We were worried nobody was going to like it like we liked it. And it sold out immediately. And at the same time, there was this national barrel shortage. And we suddenly said, wow, we just hit a home run. Everybody loves it. This is really great. And then we couldn't get barrels. And so that's how those photos came to be, because we found a sustainably harvested stand of white oak, which is quite rare here in the Northeast. And we said, hey, these trees are coming down anyway. They're coming down for the good of the forest, which is, in line with our own values. Mm-hmm. And we said, let's take it and let's find a cooperage and this will be easy. And, we did find the cooperage. We got a guy named Bob Hocker up in Wilmington, New York, who had a small cooperage. And he said, yeah, I can make barrels, but I don't buy trees. He said, I buy milled lumber, like ready to go for me. So anyway, we had to connect all the dots in between.
It was, make a barrel from it.
So it was, finding a mill that could quarter saw and the trucking and negotiating with the landowners, how you buy trees and, the whole.
So at the end of the day, there was no profit made on this, but it's a really great story, right?
Not even close. We learned a lot about barrels. We got some really cool photos and and now we have some old spirits aging in today, but we aged the wood for 3 years before we ever put spirits in it.
Yeah.
So
talk about
educational journey.
That is incredible. Talk about a handcrafted
That's so
journey.
cool.
So I have to say, this is my second barrel-aged gin that I've ever had. The first one was a few months ago. It was at Woods Distillery up in Salida, Colorado.
PT.
Yep.
My good friend PT.
They're two very different. I didn't meet PT that day, but I did taste through the things on the way down to a conference. But I have to say, this is mind-blowing.
This gin is my favorite liquor. And so I was super stoked that this is what you guys specialized in, and for it to come from honey, it's just incredible.
How long is this aged? Talk to us about it.
Yeah, so it's the same distillation process as Barr Hill gin, comes off the same stills, but then we're aging in a brand new American oak barrel. And when you produce a bourbon, one of the rules of bourbon is brand new American oak. You don't see brand new American oak used in not gin production, not really, many other spirits at all. Brand new American oak is fairly expensive. It's also very flavorful. So it works really well in bourbon. I particularly love bourbon. I enjoy drinking bourbon and rye. So that new American oak characteristic is something that I'm really fond of. But like I told you the story of how we came up with this. Yeah, there's probably a little bit of envy. We wanted to be producing more whiskey than we were. But when we tasted this, we said, wow, this brings all of that, bourbon kind of characteristic, but in a gin profile, which we thought was really cool. But what you're getting here, you're getting that balance between honey and juniper, but that juniper is playing with the oak in a really interesting way. Oak is very dense, hardwood. These are brand new, freshly charred barrels. So there's a real robustness to oak, and the juniper kind of softens it and brings it more into this sort of coniferous quality. I like to think of like hiking in the woods around balsam firs, cedar. You're getting a little of that because of that relationship with the juniper.
I do get that pine. It reminds me of Clear Creek did a pine distilled eau de vie that had a real pine taste, and that you did hit the nail on the head. The juniper kind of goes over almost into that pine quality when it's combined with oak.
It's fascinating to me. It's something which is silly, I didn't ever think about, but just the color difference between the one that's aged in the barrel versus the one that's not. I mean, I never considered that just because you put wine in a barrel it doesn't turn that color, right? So it's fascinating to me that it adds this beautiful maple color to it.
Yeah, and that's only 6 to 8 months in the barrel.
Really?
So
what size barrels?
These are a mix of 30s and 53s.
Okay, just enough to give it that little bit of an oak kiss.
Yeah, we're really getting a lot of surface characteristic. There's a fair amount of wood sugar that's coming out there as well. But it does a nice thing for the gin. Another quick story about this time where we were working on this product. Yeah, there was so many craft distilling, 2013, 2014. I mean, we got started in 2011, but around 2013, 2014, there was just so much coming out to market, and there was a lot of gin on the market, but not a lot of gin that distillers seemed to be proud of. And, we were super proud of our gin. We wanted to be making whiskey, but it felt like every time I was out in market, I'd hear what I call the gin apology, like, hey, buy my gin, because someday I'll have whiskey for you. And we realized that there's no need to apologize for gin. And so when we came out with Tomcat, we said, the gin apology is never happening. We really just stopped. We do make a whiskey. We can talk about that as well if you want to, but we don't sell it. We haven't sold any whiskey yet. We've said, hey, let's be very patient with whiskey. Whiskey needs patience. But let's play in gin and bring gin to market with no apologies whatsoever.
I noticed on the label, it's made with grain neutral spirits. Where does the honey come in during the process?
Yeah. So with the gin process, it's a grain neutral spirit distillation, and that's what we're using to extract the juniper oils. And then the honey's coming in post distillation.
Okay.
So I mentioned with the vodka, there's no sweetening of the vodka. There's no honey added after distillation. With the gin, there is. So you're probably actually, and again, because we're looking for that sweetness, we're actually trying to bring in some of that sweetness to play well with that resinous drying character of the juniper. So there's actually more honey going into the production of the vodka, but there's probably more honey that you're actually tasting and experiencing on the palate in the gin.
Where the honey is actually treated as a botanical of the final composite.
Exactly.
And is there a specific honey you're using for the Tomcat gin versus the Barr Hill gin?
Same goals. Obviously
Same.
there's a lot of variation in all the barrels we bring in here, but we're striving for very similar, more than similar. We're striving for the same targets there.
I like what you said about the whiskey, though. You said that you're making it I think where a lot of whiskey goes wrong is people they want to rush and get the whiskey out, and whiskey can't be rushed or it's not good. So the fact that you guys are doing whiskey now and sitting on it is awesome.
We've actually taken a very long approach. It's probably the worst business plan in the world. But so Todd actually, in 2015, Todd actually sold the company to me with a goal of getting back to his agricultural roots. I was pretty new to distilling and had really committed, quite a lot of my future life to distilling, and thinking about not distilling wasn't really a part of my thought process, because we were just starting to fill barrels. We weren't emptying them. Whereas Todd wanted to get back to agriculture. He sold the company to me and he bought a farm. Actually didn't even buy a farm. He bought farm land and had to build a farm. So he bought 100 acres in Greensboro, Vermont, and started growing rye grain. And rye is an incredible grain for this area. We're in the Northeast, very hardy, cold climate up here. You plant rye in the fall, it overwinters, and then it comes up in the spring. And that process allows it to establish a better root system. The relatively unpredictable springs of the Northeast, it just gives a better shot than it would with a product like corn or barley. So Todd really fell in love. He grew up as a beekeeper, and now he's full on rye farming. And then we take all the rye that he grows or most of the rye that he grows, and we bring it into the distillery. We make a rye whiskey. So that whole project started in 2016 was his first harvest. And we've produced just a very small amount of barrels every year since. And I think we'll make 60 or 70 barrels this year total. But we've got some barrels that just turned 6 years old and they're tasting great. I think we'll probably release a few barrels this year, but for the most part, probably 2024, 2025, we'll have probably more of the aged stuff. In the first year, we only produced 12 barrels total.
Wow. Where does honey play a role in this? Or does it?
It doesn't at this point. We might start to kind of commingle those two worlds, but for right now, we're really trying to explore rye with the same kind of curiosity that we brought to honey.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's this one distillery by me, Malahat. Malahat did a collab with a hotel down in San Diego. They've got a apiary. They got a beehive on the roof. So they ended up doing a honey whiskey, but it's bone dry, but finished it has a little honey finish on it. Kind of reminded me of when we were talking. Kind of reminded me a little of the Tomcat gin with its finish.
Yeah, very cool. Well, let's check that out.
I'll send you a sample of it. I think I don't think they have any more for sale, but there's a bottle sitting on by bar somewhere.
Yeah, sounds great.
So you got the rye. Let's talk about like your growth and the growth of Barr Hill and Caledonia Spirits. As you've grown, is there anything you kind of in hindsight would have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, probably a lot, but I don't know. I mean, we have, by business standards, we have not done this the right way. I mean, I don't know how much listeners, sort of pay attention to the spirits industry. And I don't want to knock anyone. I think there's a lot of fantastic brands that have all been built different ways. But for the most part of the spirits industry, you can run a pretty low overhead operation. Sort of, we call it the kind of the conference room model, where you come up with a concept and a story and then source some juice that fits the story, whether it's, fiction or nonfiction, and then take it out to market. And if the product's successful, you might someday build the distillery. And that's just not the way that we knew how to operate or would have operated. We really started with Todd was literally a beekeeper. It was a hobby that led to a commercial operation and then a fascination for supporting pollinators. I fell in love with fermentation and wanted to create and explore flavor. And then Todd and I built the distillery before there was even production shell, and same thing with this Montpelier facility. It's a 27,000 square foot facility that can produce quite a lot of rye whiskey someday. So we've sort of been building sort of brick and mortar and putting our roots in the ground long before there's been brand success. And that's probably foolish from a business level, but it's really part of our ethos. It's part of our core. It's part of what motivates our team every day. So, if you come here to Montpelier, We have an on-site cocktail bar. We have two bars. One is more focused on education and making sure the folks walk away knowing how to make the best teas or martini or old fashioned or whatever gin cocktail you want to consume. And the other one's open to the public all the time. But we want to make sure that everybody that comes in these walls, sees our stills, meets our people, experiences raw honey in its most beautiful form, and hopefully walks away knowing that we need bees. And that's just central to our core, what motivates us. It makes a tough business model, but I think it has led to, we haven't had explosive growth. We're not the celebrity backed brand that will be 3 times this size tomorrow. That's just not part of our business model. We've just had this steady, consistent growth for a decade, and we've built a pretty strong business out of it with a really passionate following of consumers that fall in love with the cocktails that our gin pairs well with.
It's hard in hindsight. I mean, because if you didn't have that attention to detail and you didn't have those ambitious drive, you probably wouldn't have the quality level that you are today.
Yeah. I mean, I learned how to be a distiller by trying to build a distillery and quite frankly, making a lot of mistakes and saying, hey, this isn't working. And then shut it down, take it apart, find another welder to help you put it back together and try it again. And, it's that, kind of trial and error that had really has taken us to this place of really appreciating and understanding, what it is that we do.
Oh, for sure.
And do you have a cocktail bar at your facility?
Yep, we do. And we have plenty of space. We also host a lot of events here. So, I said 27,000 square feet, only about 18,000 of that's part of the production. And then we have our office space, and then we have a very spacious bar. And it's a pretty happening scene. Montpelier, Vermont is a very small town. It's the capital of Vermont.
That's what I was going to lead into.
Yeah, there's about 9,000 people in this town, but we get a lot of folks that come up to go skiing in Vermont and they stop by the Barr Hill Distillery.
For someone visiting Vermont, in Montpelier, they've got skiing. Is there other craft distilleries or anything else that you would partner with, or you're the game in town?
Well, I mean, there's some great restaurants. Montpelier is just like a beautiful town. It's a really small town, but it's got a nice actual downtown. I go there every weekend with my kids and just kind of let people run free. It's a pretty relaxed lifestyle around here. But, Vermont has more breweries per capita than any other state in the nation. We're essentially drowning in beer. Come visit and help us drink all the great beverages here. But no, there's some great breweries, incredible cheesemakers, Jasper Hill. Oh gosh, that's such a loaded question. I could really.
And who am I going to offend?
Well, I mean, Lawson's Finest Liquids is right over in Waitsfield. John and Jen at The Alchemists are over in Stowe. Sean Hill is up in Greensboro, so Hill Farmstead. So those are kind of 3 of the most popular breweries. I think kind of rock star status for all of those folks. They probably wouldn't even return my phone call. They're so cool. But, they just all make incredible beer, and they really set a beverage standard that we all have to try to keep up with. So Vermont's, it's a place where a lot of things are made. There's a lot of, I don't know if you guys know Jasper Hill, but there's some of the most incredible cheesemakers in the country.
Yep.
And they're, you could drive by their farm and not know you ever drove by. This pretty sizable operation at this point, but it's all dug into the hillside, and they've got these cheese caves on a dirt road in rural Vermont. And they're making some of the most insanely delicious cheese you've ever tasted. And it's shipping to California. You can find Jasper Hill all around the country, and they have never strayed from their attention to detail and the quality.
It's fantastic cheese.
Yeah, good stuff. So
That's fantastic. So Ryan, as we're kind of wrapping down here, is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up?
No, one more exciting thing. We just released a barrel age version of a barrel strength version of Tomcat, which is the Kingdom strength.
Oh, yeah.
Which is not, we haven't taken it out to distribution yet, but it's 113 proof. We're kind of playing on Navy strength. There's actually a little bit less honey. So you're getting, a little bit more juniper, a little bit more oak at a higher strength, but it's a really fantastic product. And yeah, the teams worked really hard on it. This is actually, Andrew and Mallory spent a lot of time in the barrel room, and they really kind of pioneered this flavor, but pulled back on the honey a little bit. And it's produced a really brilliant cask strength product.
Well, that sounds fantastic. So it comes out of the barrel at 113 proof?
Yep. Yeah, it actually comes out a little bit higher than that. And then we're adding honey post barrel, and that brings the proof down just a touch.
What does it come out of the still?
About 160 proof. Give or
Okay.
take.
Just through evaporation and through the aging, it cuts down a bit.
We take it off the still at a high proof, and then we're adding reverse osmosis, RO water, mineral-free water, essentially to bring it down to barrel strength. And then for our normal Tomcat and not the cast strength, we use RO water again to bring it down one more step to the 86 proof.
Yeah. All right.
When do you plan to release that one? I don't see it on the website yet. So.
It is available. We just released the second batch. So we did the first batch. It sold out very quickly. And we just released batch 2 of Kingdom Strength.
Awesome.
That's fantastic. So Ryan, where can people find out more about you, Caledonia Spirits, and Barr Hill?
Yeah, we're on social media, Instagram at Barr Hill Gin. We have a website, barrhill.com or caledoniaspirits.com. And then I'm on social, personally, you can see sort of behind the scenes distillery stuff from me. You might also get some, terrible dad jokes and whatever else comes with that, but distill Vermont, distill_Vermont.
Oh, cool. Cool. Check it out and follow. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks
for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.